On Primetime Politics, troubled by what was said in Washington. Coming up, we'll speak to Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey about his meetings in the U.S. Capitol. We'll find out why he left discouraged by some of the language he heard. Also, we convene the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs about the strategies political leaders are now adopting in the face of the Trump chaos. And pollster David Coletto on the shifting political ground that is changing Liberal fortunes. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, we witnessed a two-pronged charm offensive this week as premiers and the federal finance minister all made their way to Washington trying to dissuade the White House from punishing tariffs that could be coming Canada's way by March. But in the end, the premiers only secured a meeting with deputy White House chiefs of staff and the Trump administration while it kept selling the benefits of a tariff regime.
But remember, if they drop their tariffs, prices for Americans are coming down. Our production's going up and our costs are going down. Remember, it's a two-way street. That's why it's called reciprocal.
Well, to discuss the matter, we are now joined by Andrew Furey, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Premier, always good to see you. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Listen, you've been very clear with your message about standing firm when it comes to the Trump administration, but I'm wondering what you actually mean by that. Do you mean to say that there's no ground to give up whatsoever when it comes to steel, aluminum, banking, or marketing boards? You know, the areas that Donald Trump has cited as things that irritate him.
Well, look, first of all of those things you just mentioned were pulled out of thin air. So when I say we need to be firm and strong, we need to have a definitive strategy. We need to draw a line in the sand, and we cannot let the president erode that line, or else there'll be no sand, there'll be no beach. I mean, it's all published in his book, The Art of the Deal. He tries to make things chaotic. He tries to anchor people in extremes, and then tries to extract value then in that playing field. So we need to, as leaders, decide where our yardsticks are and just hold firm on them. It'll sound unusual for a Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador to agree with former Prime Minister Harper. Certainly, God knows, Danny Williams wouldn't have, but I totally agree with what he has said. That this is an attack on our sovereignty, it's an attack on our identity, and while we may be in pursuit of a resolution in the acute phase, there is no cost that is too great to protect the sharp edges of the maple leaf. We cannot let this scenario erode our identity, erode those edges, erode who we are as Canadians, our Canadian values. And we can never succumb to the concept of the 51st state. And I know most people dismiss that as a joke. I can tell you, having been in those rooms in DC, he is not joking. And that is chilling to hear as Canadians, that the President of the United States wants to acquire Canada as a state. But that is what he is saying. And his team are telling us to take him as his word. He means what he says, and he says what he means.
Okay, so
he's had 4 or 5 opportunities now to change that, and he hasn't.
Yeah, he hasn't changed his tune. So when Canada then commits hundreds of millions of dollars to respond to concerns about illegal fentanyl and illegal migrants making their way through the Canada-US border, was that a miscalculation then to commit all that money to react to a Trump tweet?
Well, first of all, I said from day one, I believed he was conflating 2 issues. You know, what tariffs have to do with fentanyl is beyond me. I don't think it's a waste of money because any time that we can extract, we can eliminate drugs in any way, shape, or form, or illegal firearms, or prevent the movement of migrants, illegal migrants, we should be doing that anyway. Not for Americans, for Canadians. No one wants to see fentanyl on the streets of St. John's, Fredericton, or Vancouver. So we should be trying to take that off. And if that means you know, increasing our border capacity, increasing our border control, because most of the drugs are coming from the United States into Canada and not the other way around, then we should be doing that to protect Canadians. So it's not a waste of resources. It's not a waste of money. In fact, hopefully it will prevent drugs from getting into the hands of vulnerable people. But I think now is the time for us to pause as leaders and reflect after this last week of erratic behavior and demands, to reevaluate what our strategy is as Team Canada. Because there was moments down there in DC where I shook my head, scratched my head, and said, are we just negotiating with ourselves? And if that's the case, if we should just, come home and redevelop a strategy that is not one of appeasement or capitulation, but one in which we know where those parameters are and are unwilling to bend on them. Because it does feel like if he's the only one who's making these decisions, that responding to his erratic demands will only make him the puppet master in all of this, and will dance when he pulls the string. And I don't believe that that is the right way to start this negotiation. Negotiations shouldn't be done in public. And while we all want to be advocating, and I think it was important that we were down there advocating on behalf of Canadians, and will continue to do so, he's continuously changing the table. He's continuously setting new parameters. And my ask of Minister LeBlanc was to meet with Mr. Lutnick to at least establish a firm, structured table. Right now, it feels like we're at a table with 3 legs. Every day we get up and something shifts and turns over. So I think it's time for us to reflect on what the best strategy is moving forward. I think it needs to be a firm, strong Canadian diplomatic response that is responsible to all Canadians, but meets the moment with strength and firmness that it deserves when there's an attack on our sovereignty.
It sounds like you're discouraged after your trip to DC, that you think a trade war is almost inevitable.
I'm not discouraged. I would say that the conversations were constructive, but at times very concerning. Look, it's discouraging when I hear the words come out of the Deputy Chief of Staff to the White House mouth that he is not joking when he says the 51st state. I wouldn't be Canadian if I wasn't discouraged by that. That is upsetting, it's offensive, and insulting. And I think all Canadians should see it as such. And I think the problem sometimes with when we think about our sovereignty is traditionally we think sovereignty is lost through military exercises. Well, since 2000, most sovereign countries have lost or diluted their sovereignty through economic means. And that should not be an abstract concept. It's for Canadians. It certainly isn't for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, because only 75 years ago, Newfoundland and Labrador gave up its independence, its sovereignty, to join Canada. There was no tanks on the streets of Duckworth Street. There was no tanks in Trinity Bay or military ships. It was an economic crisis that caused us to join Canada. And so I think we all had to be very aware, as the former Prime Minister suggested, that this is an economic attack, but it is not just in pursuit of revenues, it is in pursuit of potentially the 51st state. That's going to take a lot of resolve. It's going to take a lot of courage for Canadians and businesses and industries to meet the moment. But I do believe that resolve and that pride in who we are as Canadians exists from coast to coast to coast. And I have no doubt that this moment will be met.
Quickly running out of time, but I do have to ask you, because if not the United States, it does mean that this country, every province, every jurisdiction needs to look to diversify with whom it does trade. Where is Newfoundland and Labrador looking to diversify and find the economic growth if we cannot rely on a traditional ally?
So we've been looking to diversify prior to President Trump, because it's good business. It's good for the economy. Newfoundland and Labrador is a bit different than some other landlocked provinces in that usually our competitive disadvantage was the fact that we were an island in a northern portion, mainland portion of our province, so geographically isolated. But full access to tidal water now is a benefit, is a competitive advantage for our products, because our oil and gas does not rely on pipelines. We don't need a new pipeline. We can ship that anywhere in the world tomorrow. Our crab, our valuable seafood, we can ship it anywhere tomorrow. Right now, 90% of our crab, our most valuable species within our seafood portfolio, goes to the United States. But I know that the Middle East, the UAE would want that. I know, Asia would want that. So now is the time. We should have been doing it anyway, and we were, but now is the time to accelerate those diversification mechanisms within the marketplace. That's true across our seafood, our critical minerals, and our oil and gas products.
Premier Andrew Furey, I appreciate this, speaking to us so soon after your visit to D.C. Thank you for the time.
Thanks very much.
Well, for some reaction to what we just heard, we are now joined by the bureau chiefs. Robert Fife is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa bureau chief for LaPresse. Hello to the three of you.
Hello, Michael.
Thanks for having us.
So listen, let's begin with what you just heard from Premier Furey there. Discouraged that the deputy White House chiefs of staff basically said that when Donald Trump talks about Canada being the 51st state, he's not joking. That reiterates, thank you for the report last week, Tonda, that from the leaked mic, the hot mic moment of the Prime Minister saying the exact same thing, which makes me wonder, Bob, how successful can any of these missions, these charm offensives be to the United States if the White House does not respect the sovereignty of this country?
Well, look, I don't think this was a successful mission by the premiers to the White House. They had to line up like tourists, waiting an hour to get through the security, which you and I have, all of us have done when we've gone there as reporters. And who did he meet? The Deputy Chief of Staff for Legislative Affairs and the White House personnel. I mean, this is a joke. Far better for the premiers to get on Fox News, where the president actually listens to all the time, and where the voting base is, to make the case, which is something that Doug Ford has actually done quite a bit of, and credit to him for that. I think what we missed as journalists was the real story, which is Dominic LeBlanc, our finance minister, meeting with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, where presumably some real substantive issues were raised with them in terms of these enormous threats of tariffs that are coming down the pipe. So it was good on them that they went to Washington. That's fine. But I think it was more a sell back, look at what we're doing back home, than something that was going to have a significant impact on Trump's thinking.
Yeah, which again goes to the very fact that he continues time and again doubling down on this idea of Canada as a 51st state. So how successful can any of these missions be, Tonda?
Look, it depends on what outreach they're doing beyond their attempts to reach the White House. I think to Bob's point about, going on Fox News, well, actually, maybe these premiers would have been more effective had they met with, the Republican lawmakers from the states that do actual business with their respective provinces. And I think that's the kind of flood the zone effort that is called for now. But it's not really clear to me if any of it will work, because the most astounding thing to me is not just that the president's not listening, but the Howard Lutnicks of the world and the American corporate leadership is all falling in line. And there's a sort of massive bystanderism going on across America right now, letting Trump get away with making false statements about his own economy and the impact of tariffs on his own economy. So to what extent any of it can be effective, I think that's a big question. I mean, someone has said that, Trump is having a field day right now because sort of the opposition really isn't on the ice just yet. And maybe some of the systems and the reviews and things will kick in, and when he tries to get things through Congress, maybe it'll kick in, but I think we're all in for a roller coaster.
Yeah, Joël-Denis?
I would argue that it's time to expand our diplomatic efforts outside of Washington, to go to Republican states, go see governors who do not owe their jobs to Donald Trump, like the advisors that are surrounding Mr. Trump. So by talking to governors in red states, namely, you maybe have those people talk about the impact of the tariffs on behalf of their states, but also talking directly to their voters. And that may swing, I think, the mood in the United States, because Mr. Trump keeps saying stuff that ordinary citizens in the United States believe is true, like they are subsidizing Canada up to the tune of $200 billion. It's not true. It's a commercial, surplus that we have with the United States. So it's time, I think, to expand our diplomatic efforts and reach out to governors in a more sustained way.
And beyond them, international allies are going to be important in this fight. Yeah. So trying to access and use those networks that Canada used somewhat successfully when they were trying to pressure China on the two Michaels, right? Mm-hmm. And rallying a common front. But even there, you see that it's almost every country for himself right now. Everybody's kind of digging in.
You are seeing, though, the odd CEO, like Ford CEO, saying, look, this is going to mean job losses in the United States, right?
But the odd one, right?
But we need more of those people to come forward. One of the things that's going to happen here is there will be job losses in the United States. Inflation will go up, and the Federal Reserve Board will not cut interest rates. He needs to get interest rates down to be able to sell it to the American people. All he seems to be concerned about is giving a great big tax cut to wealthy people, and he's trying to figure out a way how to pay for that. And he wants us to pay for it, frankly. And look, this is a hugely scary period of time for Canadians and the world, frankly, because nobody's standing up to him.
He flat out stated that yesterday, Thursday, in the Oval Office, and said that all these tariffs that he's amassing are going to help pay down the $36 trillion debt. And when he was asked about a $1 trillion figure floating around in terms of the revenue he hopes to get on these tariffs, he didn't dispute it. So I think we should believe him when he says it's so.
Yeah. Well, and as we noted last week, you know, what's happening in the United States necessarily changes the political ground that we're dealing with here in Canada. And so far, it seems very much to be benefiting Mark Carney's bid to lead the Liberal Party. Although we've seen some Conservative pushback today, I'm going to begin here with some of the commentary we heard on the Hill from a few notable Conservatives. Take a look.
Why isn't the media holding Mark Carney to account? He's about to become the Prime Minister because a small group of Liberal Party members are going to install him. The least you can do is cover the way he's treating these important issues.
There have been if only few questions from the media about how much his megacorp profited while he was advising the government.
Over the last 2 days, Mark Carney again admitted his own lie about not wanting to impose a carbon tax. In fact, he says he's changing the carbon tax, a new and bigger carbon tax.
Now, add to that an attack ad that was launched today on Friday. Take a bit of a look at that.
Trump wants our jobs.
We're going to take other countries' jobs.
And Mark Carney is just the man to help him. Trudeau and Carney sold out Canada with job-killing taxes that push jobs south. He opposed Canadian pipelines while profiting off U.S. coal. Carney even moved his company's headquarters to New York, just as Trump wanted.
You're sneaky.
Carbon tax Carney. If Carney wins, Canada loses.
So there you have it, some of the Conservative responses. So again, shifting the political ground Donald Trump is here in Canada. What do you make of what the Conservatives are now doing in response to this?
Well, the Conservatives, quite rightly, are scared. They thought that they were going to win the next election campaign on a rejection of the Trudeau Liberals, and now all of a sudden Donald Trump has changed the whole dynamics. And he in steps Mark Carney, who's clearly going to win the Liberal leadership, somebody with impressive credentials. He handled the financial crisis in 2008 here in Canada as the Bank of Canada governor. He handled the Brexit question in the United States as in the UK as the Bank of Canada, Bank of England governor, and polls are showing a narrowing of the race. So they're going to go after him, and we saw that today in the Conservative caucus, where mostly they never talked to the journalists, so at least 3 of them did, but it was all attacking Carney as an elitist, out of touch with working Canadians. Why aren't you journalists doing a better job of going after him? All of that sort of stuff. They have to be very, very concerned about him. And these attack ads have just come out now. They are really worried because they were sort of saving those attack ads for after the leadership vote. Now they're pushing them out the door because they're very concerned, rightly so, that Mr. Carney is probably going to call a snap election soon after he becomes Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, and he did say in Vancouver this week that it is a possibility of dropping a writ sometime mid-March. But, you know, Tonda, it does create this question about who is best to take on Donald Trump, and that seems to show that Conservatives are worried that Canadians are concluding it's Mark Carney.
Canadians, I think the Conservatives are looking at the polls, seeing that Canadians are weighing other alternatives other than Mr. Poilievre. And, you know, it's not just one poll now. We've had a series of polls over the last 10 days that have shown significant movement. And the significant movement is not just because Justin Trudeau is gone and because Trump has amped up his 51st state threats. I think it's also that they also perceive the carbon tax election and just inflation lines no longer apply to this situation, and they're looking for what's the antidote to Trump. Will Carney be the one? Perhaps. I think the Conservatives are trying to get out in front of something that looks like a wave right now. But they're not wrong in some respects. Here's where they're not wrong. Mark Carney has yet to answer substantively a lot of questions on his platform. Why? Because he's running a peekaboo campaign. He's running a classic front-runner bubble campaign. His campaign is full of gatekeepers. The media doesn't have much access to him. When they do, it's a few questions, limited. He's not doing daily press conferences anywhere in this country. Yesterday, he did a housing announcement in Vancouver and released no detail on it. So they're not wrong. He's not being tested. It would be to the Liberals' advantage were he to be tested every day in scrums, because when he gets into an election campaign, it's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah, and to that, he's not been tested in the House, where he would be part of a constant debate. Last word to you, Joël-Denis.
The sense that I get from the comments from the Conservative Party is that they're 2 weeks behind the reality, the political reality that we are facing in Canada. They're still fighting the old battles. They need to pivot to the current situation. And what is the situation? Donald Trump is a real threat to Canada. Canadians are scared. How are you going to reassure us, and are you going to defend our interests? So we're still waiting for them to adjust to the new reality. Maybe we'll hear about it tomorrow, Saturday, when Mr. Poilievre is supposed to make a 40-minute speech to try to reset the message, recalibrate his message. We'll see if they do it. If they don't do it, well, I think the polls that we've seen will only increase the support of the Liberal Party, because Canadians are looking for a real option to face Donald Trump.
I mean, Stephen Harper came out this week, and within 5 short sentences, wrapped himself in the Canadian flag and was a bigger, better, louder Captain Canada than Pierre Poilievre has been for the past 6 weeks. So I think, yeah, they know they need to make a pivot, and Harper kind of gave them a path to how to make that pivot, didn't he?
Okay. Well, as you say, we're actually going to speak to David Coletto about another round of polling numbers in just a second. But for this, Bob, Tonda, Joël-Denis, always thank you.
Have a good weekend, guys.
You too. Well, the political uncertainty coming from Donald Trump is also affecting the political outlook here in Canada. The latest numbers from Abacus data indicating Liberals are gaining more traction across the country. And with more, we're now joined by the founder and CEO of Abacus Data, David Coletto. David, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So listen, let's take a look at your latest numbers. The Conservatives still, as we take a look at the board here, still solidly in the lead, but the Liberals are definitely gaining ground. What is happening here?
Well, I think overall, the ground underneath Canadian politics has shifted dramatically over the last number of months, right? You've got the Prime Minister announcing his resignation. You have a Liberal leadership race that is in full swing, and you basically have a daily deluge from Donald Trump raising people's anxiety in this country and getting them to I think, refocus a little bit on what the big question is that they're going to likely get asked when the next election comes. And so the result of that is we are seeing the Liberals gaining. We are seeing people becoming more open-minded to voting Liberal again in a way that they haven't been for the last 2 years. And that's putting pressure both on the New Democrats, who see their vote go down, and I think on the Conservatives, although we still have them still well ahead of the Liberals, there's a lot of threats out there for Conservatives, and I think they can't take that support for granted right now.
Yeah, threats, as you say, and it seems Mark Carney is the biggest one, because you have the Liberals with the most support at 28% when you tested it under the potential leadership of Mark Carney. You compare that to Chrystia Freeland with just 21% under her leadership. What's behind those trend numbers as you take a look at them, David?
Well, I think two things. You look first how low that NDP number gets when it's Mark Carney's name on that ballot and not Chrystia Freeland's. I think other polls are showing this, that there is something about Mark Carney right now that is pulling a lot of progressive voters into the Liberal tent. It's that, I think partly that he carries less baggage from the Trudeau years in people's minds. He, I think, looks like a steady hand. And one thing that Liberals and New Democrats pretty much agree on right now is they don't like Pierre Poilievre. And so as that choice becomes more clear, I think the real risk for the New Democrats is being squeezed out, and that's benefiting the Liberals, especially, at least right now, if Mark Carney were to become Liberal leader. The other thing, just to say, Michael, is when we ask people, what do you think about Mark Carney? He has a generally pretty, a good, favorable rating. Of those who know who he is, his net rating is plus 13, which is better than any of the federal leaders right now. So he would start off as Liberal leader, at least today's, based on our numbers, and I know the Conservatives released an ad today going after him, in a pretty good place. And that's why I think you're seeing the Conservatives targeting him, because he is a real threat to them.
Yeah, a real threat, as you say. But, I will say, though, as you measure this Liberal success, your numbers do differ a bit from other recent surveys, because, yes, you have Liberals gaining ground when you look at your numbers, but other surveys have the Conservative and Liberal support within 10 points of each other. You essentially have a 19-point spread. What should viewers make of that?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is this is a really volatile time. And so the polls are, for the last few weeks, have been saying some different things. And we see that from time to time. For the last 2 years, we haven't. But I think there have been times where the polls, because of different methodologies, different choices that pollsters like me are making, we will get slightly different estimates, or significantly different in the case of what we're seeing right now. But I think what we're all measuring is a shift in how a lot of Canadians are thinking about politics right now. We all agree that the Liberal vote is going up. We all agree that there are more people open to voting Liberal. And so there's a little disagreement on how firm that Conservative vote is. I'm more bullish, I guess, on the Conservatives. I don't see the evidence that they're losing that coalition that they've built just yet. But there's indicators that it could happen. And so, there's no easy explanation, Michael, for why our polls are different. But I think one of them is, that the way in which we're actually assessing how large that Conservative universe actually is right now.
Yeah, and as you say, the one commonality seems to be this idea that the ground is shifting, the Liberals are gaining because of that shifting ground. So here we are, just a few weeks away from the Liberal leadership vote, a few weeks away before those Trump tariffs are supposed to go into effect. So David, what are you going to be watching out for in the next little while?
Well, I think it's that. What is the question Canadians are asking? I think, 3 months ago, Michael, it was overwhelmingly, I want change, and I'm going to look for the version of change that I like the best. And Pierre Poilievre was winning that question. But Donald Trump every single day reminds us of how threatened we feel, how uncertain the future is. And I think more and more Canadians are actually asking the question, which of these choices, which will be clarified when the Liberals select their leader in the next few weeks, is best going to protect me? Defend me against the threats that Donald Trump poses. And that is a very different question than just simply change. And so I'm going to be watching carefully about that orientation among the public, because I think it will ultimately lead then to the options that people are willing to look at when it comes to actually voting for the next government.
Okay, well, I look forward to our next conversation, David. Your next poll, thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.
That is David Coletto. And that is also our program for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back next week. Until then, have a great weekend.